It was one of those nights in Maplewood Estates when the air felt thicker than it should. A southern summer night, the kind where crickets sing in the dark, porch lights glow like fireflies, and the air smells faintly of cut grass and gasoline. I sat on my front porch nursing a cold beer, staring at the cul-de-sac I'd called home for the last 5 years. You wouldn't think a neighborhood could feel like both heaven and hell, but that's exactly what Maplewood Estates had become. The homes were clean, the lawns perfectly trimmed, kids rode bikes until sundown, and American flags fluttered from nearly every porch. But behind that perfect image, there was the HOA, the Homeowners Association, led by one man, Richard Whitmore. Richard wasn't just a president. He was a tyrant in khakis. Mid-50s, neatly parted silver hair, and a permanent scowl like the world owed him gratitude for his service to the neighborhood. He lived 2 streets down, but his shadow stretched everywhere. From the way you parked your car to how tall your grass could grow, Richard had an opinion, and a fine to back it up. For me, Richard's war began the day he mailed me a citation for leaving my trash cans out longer than 12 hours. I'd been late picking them up because my daughter had a fever. Didn't matter. A bright yellow slip on my door and a $50 fine followed. That's when I realized Maplewood wasn't about community. It was about control. Over the months, the little things stacked up. Warnings about a non-compliant garden gnome. Complaints about my pickup truck parked on the street for too many consecutive nights. Even a letter about the shade of blue on my mailbox flag. It was all Richard enforcing the rules. But nothing pushed me closer to the edge than what happened 2 nights before the towing incident. It was late, around 10:30 p.m., when I pulled into my driveway to find a car already there. A black Lexus sedan, sleek, spotless, sitting right where my truck should be. I thought maybe it belonged to a visitor at my neighbor's, so I knocked on doors. Nobody claimed it. Finally, I noticed a little HOA parking permit hanging from the rearview mirror with President stamped across the top. Richard's car. He'd parked in my driveway, without asking, without warning, like he owned not just the neighborhood, but my home too. My blood boiled. I grabbed my phone and called him. He didn't answer. I texted. No reply. By midnight, the Lexus was still there, silent and smug like a trespasser who knew I couldn't touch him. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed listening to the hum of the ceiling fan, staring at the glow of the streetlight outside my window, my mind spinning. Who the hell parks in another man's driveway and doesn't even bother to explain? I didn't know it yet, but that Lexus was the beginning of a war I hadn't asked for, one that would end with flashing lights, a tow truck, and Richard's pride being dragged down the street at 3 in the morning. By the next morning, Richard's Lexus was still in my driveway. Dew beaded across its glossy hood, the neighborhood kids circling around it on bikes like it was some exotic attraction. My daughter, Emma, peeked out the window and frowned. "Daddy, why is there a strange car where your truck goes?" she asked, tugging at her cereal spoon. "Because some people think the rules don't apply to them," I muttered, trying to keep my voice calm. At 9 a.m. sharp, I walked down the street to Richard's house. His wife, a frazzled woman with nervous eyes, answered the door. She told me Richard had left early for a golf outing. His Lexus? "Oh, he left it at your place. Said it was safer there overnight." Safer. The word rattled in my head like a loose screw. Safer than his own driveway. Safer than his own garage. He'd decided my home was some kind of overflow parking lot, without so much as a knock on my door. When I pressed her for details, his wife shrugged apologetically. "You'll have to take it up with him. I don't get involved in HOA matters." That was the thing about Richard. Everything, even his arrogance, was cloaked as HOA business. By late afternoon, I'd had enough. I called the HOA office number. It went to voicemail. I left a sharp message. "Richard, move your damn car. You've got until tonight." No reply. When dusk fell and the Lexus was still there, I drove my truck onto the street. My neighbors watched from their porches, whispering. To them, I was either the guy standing up to the tyrant or the fool about to get crushed by him. Adrenaline of knowing once I made the call, there was no going back. I looked at the clock, 2:47 a.m. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of silence where every small sound feels like a drumbeat. I dialed. 24-hour towing. How can we help you? My voice was steady when I said, "Yeah, I've got an unauthorized vehicle in my driveway. I need it gone." The dispatcher asked for the address. I gave it. Then I hung up and waited, heart pounding like I'd just set a fuse on dynamite. The rumble came first, low, distant, like thunder rolling in from the horizon. Then, at 3:02 a.m., a pair of bright halogen beams swept across my blinds. The tow truck. I slipped on my shoes and stepped outside, the humid air clinging to my skin. The neighborhood was dead quiet, but the mechanical clank of chains and the hiss of hydraulics shattered that stillness. The driver, a burly man in grease-stained overalls, barely looked at me as he backed his rig into position. "That the one?" he asked, pointing at the Lexus. "Yeah," I said. My voice cracked, but it carried enough weight to convince him I meant it. He nodded, then went to work. The steel claws of the lift slid under the Lexus's tires with a sound that made my stomach twist, like a predator sinking its teeth into prey. The car rocked slightly as the back end lifted off the ground. That's when the first porch light flicked on. Mrs. Carter, the night owl from across the street, peeked through her blinds. Then another light clicked on, and another. Within minutes, the cul-de-sac was alive with whispers, shadows moving behind curtains, neighbors in robes and slippers stepping outside to see the spectacle. And then came the sound I was half dreading, half expecting, Richard's voice. "What the hell is going on here?" He came striding down the street in golf slacks and a polo, his silver hair disheveled, face red with fury. He looked less like a dignified HOA president and more like a man watching his kingdom crumble. "That's my car," he shouted at the driver. The driver didn't flinch. "Sir, this vehicle is unauthorized. Tow orders valid. Take it up with dispatch." Richard spun on me, his fingers stabbing the air. "You called them? You dare touch my car? Do you know who I am?" Neighbors gasped audibly. It was the first time most of them had seen Richard lose control. His voice cracked, raw and panicked, stripped of its usual smug authority. I stepped forward, keeping my tone calm, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "You parked in my driveway without permission. You fine me for it. The bylaws you wrote say unauthorized vehicles get towed. I'm just following the rules." The driver's rig groaned as the Lexus lifted higher. Richard's face twisted, caught between rage and humiliation. He lunged toward the truck, but two neighbors, Mr. Carter and a younger guy from the end of the street, blocked him. "Let it go, Richard," Carter muttered. "You made this bed." For a moment, the whole neighborhood seemed to hold its breath. The sound of crickets filled the silence, mingling with the hydraulic whine of the tow. Then, as if scripted by fate itself, Richard screamed, "This isn't over. You'll regret this." But his words were drowned out by the roar of the tow truck pulling away, dragging the Lexus's rear wheels into the night. The sight was almost surreal. Maplewood's king stripped of his crown, his symbol of power hauled off in chains. As the red taillights disappeared down the street, the neighbors turned to me. Some smirked, some whispered, and for the first time since moving into Maplewood Estates, I felt the balance of power shift. I had lit a fuse, and there was no telling how big the explosion would be. The morning after felt strangely calm, like the silence that follows a thunderstorm. The cul-de-sac buzzed with quiet energy, neighbors chatting in hushed tones, sprinklers ticking across manicured lawns, kids whispering about the night Richard's car got taken away. By the time I walked out to grab the paper, I could feel the stares. Not hostile, curious, maybe even approving. Mrs. Carter waved from her porch. Mr. Lopez gave me a little nod. For once, people weren't afraid to acknowledge me in the open. But Richard? He was nowhere to be seen. His house, 2 streets over, sat quiet with its blinds drawn tight. Word spread fast, though. By lunchtime, half the neighborhood knew the HOA president had to shell out nearly $400 to get his Lexus out of impound. When I pulled into my driveway that evening, a thick envelope was taped to my door again. I ripped it open, bracing for another fine. Instead, I found a letter, an official HOA complaint. "Due to last night's incident, you are hereby cited for creating a disturbance." I laughed out loud, the sound echoing off the empty street. Of course Richard wouldn't back down. But something felt different now. His threats didn't carry the same weight, not after everyone had seen him humiliated under the streetlights. 2 days later, the HOA board called an emergency meeting. I showed up at the clubhouse, expecting a firing squad. But when I walked in, I noticed something odd. The room wasn't filled with hostility. It was filled with neighbors. Dozens of them. People who'd stayed silent for years. Richard sat at the head table, jaw tight, trying to reassert control. This man endangered the order of our community, he declared, pointing at me like I was on trial. If we allow such behavior, Maplewood Estates will descend into chaos. But then Mrs. Carter spoke up. Chaos? Richard, you parked in his driveway without permission. You fined him for it. You just followed the rules. The same rules you used to bully everyone here. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Mr. Lopez added, We're tired of your nonsense, Richard. Maybe it's time for new leadership. Richard's face paled. He stammered, tried to regain footing, but the tide had shifted. The board announced they'd hold a vote of no confidence the following week. That night, I walked home under a sky painted with stars, feeling lighter than I had in years. My wife squeezed my hand. You realize what you started? She whispered. I nodded. Yeah, maybe it's not just about the car. Maybe people finally saw the truth. A week later, Richard Whitmore was voted out as HOA president. He sold his house within the month, the Lexus disappearing with him. Maplewood Estates wasn't perfect after that, but it was freer, quieter, and a little more human. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in a courtroom. Sometimes, it comes at 3 a.m. on the back of a tow truck. And every time I pull my truck into my driveway now, I smile, knowing it's mine. Just mine.